Okay, you're live.
Thank you very much, Kyle. The annual meeting of the Bridge Park New Community Authority is called to order at 9:02 a.m. and we'll begin with a roll call of the members. Mr. Starr?
Here.
Mr. Strip?
Here.
Ms. Strail?
Here.
Ms. Reedy?
Here.
Mr. Schwederman?
Here.
Ms. Tackett?
Here.
And finally, our new member, and that'll be the next item, Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Okay, Rick, I'll turn it over to you for item 2. Would you like us to go ahead and get into the oath of office?
Yes, we would, like to welcome Jeff, and if you then could proceed with the oath.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, Jeff, this is going to be a little different since we're doing it virtually, but if you could repeat after me. Are you ready? Jeff, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, please repeat after me. I, Jeff Roberts.
I, Jeff Roberts.
Swear or affirm. Honestly and faithfully perform the duties of my office.
Honestly and faithfully perform the duties of my office.
As a member of the Board of Trustees.
As a member of the Board of Trustees.
Of the Bridge Park New Community Authority.
Of the Bridge Park New Community Authority.
And I will support the constitutions of the United States of America.
And I will support the constitutions of the United States of America.
Of the state of Ohio.
State of Ohio.
And the term of my office.
The term of my office.
Congratulations. Jeff, maybe by way of background, we should introduce to the folks that, Josiah had previously been on the board, but in his role as calculation agent to the board has resigned so that he can focus on serving as an objective third party. And you've been appointed by Crawford Hoying to fill that spot. Do you want to introduce yourself to folks on the board who maybe haven't had a chance to meet you?
Yeah, for those who haven't met me, my name's Jeff Roberts. I'm general counsel at Crawford Hoying. Been involved with the Bridge Park development since its inception, and happy to be a part of the board.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Back to you.
Yeah, excellent background for what we have before us here. So welcome, and the next order of business is the officer elections, and the current officers have been Lynn as treasurer, myself as chair, Matt Starr as vice chair, and Rob as secretary of the NCA. Everybody has agreed to continue in those roles. However, I would like to extend the opportunity for anyone else who would like to be considered to speak up and share your interest. Any interest from anybody else?
No, I would move to accept the slate of officers for an additional
of one year term. Okay, that's AC.
Term, Rob, I think
yes.
It's a 1 year.
Yes, it's a 1 year term.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed or abstain? Is Rob, I assume that's appropriate protocol in this forum.
Yes, it is, and the officers have been elected unanimously 7-0 by the board.
Okay, all right. Next order of business is the approval of minutes from the September 12, 2019 meeting. That's at what is labeled tab 2. Since I don't have visual, I'm not certain how that appears here, but are there any amendments or recommendation for changes to the minutes? Hearing none, then can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
And I'm sorry, was that Lynn and Ace?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? None. Okay, all approved. We have, as item 5 here is public comment, and notice was given of this meeting. My understanding is we received no comments in advance of the meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. I would note this for the benefit of the board, this meeting is being live streamed on the City of Dublin's website, and we may receive comments as the meeting proceeds, and we'll be monitoring those. We'll address them at the appropriate time.
Do we know, Rob, has anybody logged on or participating, or is that something that we would not necessarily be aware of?
I don't know. Kyle, are you able to tell how many folks might be streaming the meeting?
Yes, let me give you that information here in just a second. It looks like we have 5 concurrent viewers right now, but we don't get to see exactly who those viewers are.
Excellent.
All right, that's good. All right. Since there are no comments received at this point in time, or I would invite anybody participating to share recommended change to the agenda or addition to the agenda or any comments at this point in time. And we will, as we proceed through the agenda, we will ask for any comments, so the opportunity will still be available. Moving along then, agenda item 6 here, we have reports from officers of the board, and we'll start then with the city report. And Matt Stifler, will you be taking that agenda item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to take this opportunity to yield the floor to Greg Daniels to do a short presentation that was requested by the chairman to the board on the Bridge Park bond. So I will share my screen and allow Greg to go from there.
Thanks, Matt. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
As Matt mentioned, this is a presentation very similar to a presentation that Matt and I gave to City Council on September 14th. Rick, being a diligent board member, actually watched that meeting and asked us to come and give the same presentation here today. Basically, it's an overview of the bonds that are outstanding in connection with the Bridge Park project. In your packet is a report provided by DePerna. There's a ton of detail here, but we thought maybe this very high-level overview refresher board might be helpful. So, Matt, if you can please do that, great. So, of course, whenever we're talking about Bridge Park, we are always talking about blocks. You know, some letter and a block is how we refer to every development part of Bridge Park. What you see in front of you is the blocks on the east side of the river. Not shown here, across the pedestrian bridge on the west side is what is called Z block. That's the condos, and then there's a little bit of office and retail over there on the west side. So that's Z block. But in terms of these blocks shown here, and from right to left, right is the south side, left is the north side. Starting at the south side for A block, that's the block with the hotel, the event center, there's a parking garage and an office building there as well. Going right to left, so going north, there is B block and C block, which are the first 2 blocks built in Bridge Park. Those also have 2 large parking garages in them. Those are the parking garages that were funded by the city bond issue that was done in 2015. The city sold about $32 million of bonds to fund these 2 parking garages. The block that's currently under construction is the next block north from there, D block. that is hopefully getting close to completion sometime soon. If you've driven by there, there's been tremendous progress that is really coming together. As you go up on this picture, so you're going east, there's H block, that's the townhome block. There's also some townhomes that have already been constructed there, and construction on that is ongoing. As you go south from that, so going left to right on this page, you have G block. That's a future development block. I think Crawford Hoyne is looking at ways to develop that block. But that's the next block to really get going. And then there's the last block to the south of G block. That's F block. That's where the new hotel is located. The other half of the block is currently undeveloped, and again, that's future development property. So you hear a lot of terminology on blocks. That's a quick orientation on where and what each of these blocks are. Matt, if you could progress to the next slide, please. So there have basically been 5 large chunks of bonds issued for Bridge Park. The first, as I mentioned, are the B and C block garage bonds. That's that $32 million bond issue that the city issued. Those are payable from TIF service payments on B and C block. The community authority isn't really involved in these bonds. It's all TIF payments that the city collects. There are minimum service payment commitments from the owners of the B and C block property that more than cover the debt service for those bonds. And these bonds are not experiencing any kind of cash flow difficulties. They're doing very, very well. The next set of bonds, again, are the Z block garage bonds. Those are on the west side. In 2016, a consortium of 3 port authorities, led by the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority, issued roughly $12.8 million of bonds to fund the garage that's part of Z block. These bonds are secured by NCA charges and TIF revenue from Z block. So part of your agenda today and part of your annual agenda going forward will be to certify and approve the NCA charges on the Z block, particularly the residential condos, to the Franklin County auditor for collection, because that's a big part of the revenue that pays Z block bonds. These bonds are doing very well. Z block was always a very secure project. That's part of why the 3 port authorities agreed to participate in it. They're not experiencing any kind of cash flow difficulties, and in fact, there's excess revenues that are flowing to be used for the A block. Matt, move to the next one, please. So sequentially in time, the next set of bonds that were issued were the A block garage and roadway bonds. And getting back to the start of the project, this was always something that both the developer, Crawford Hoyne, as well as the city understood would be a challenge to get financed because of the sheer amount of public infrastructure that's going into this project. Not only roadways, but also a large garage and the event center are all located on this block and all needed to be financed. So in 2017, the Finance Authority issued the bonds to fund those community facilities. The bond issue consisted of about $27 million of senior bonds and a little under $5 million of subordinate bonds. And because of the challenge for financing this amount of community facilities, again, this was as big of a bond issue as the city issued for the first 2 blocks combined, for B and C block combined. Basically, everything in the kitchen sink in terms of revenues got pledged here to pay the bonds. So there was TIF service payments from A block. That's the hotel, the office, and some payments from the event center. The city, as part of the original development deal, made a grant, an annual grant of lodging tax revenue from the AC Marriott and the Home 2 Suites. The Home 2 Suites is, it's not part of Bridge Park proper. It's was the former Salvi site further down, closer to 270. There are NCA lodging charges imposed by the community authority. on the AC Marriott. That's another thing that this board has acted on. That acts very much the same as a bed tax. There are rental payments from the event center when they're actually having events. There's community authority charges on those H block townhomes. If you remember, H block is the northeasternmost block on the east side of Bridge Park. And there's the service payments from Z block that are not needed for the Z block bonds. As I mentioned on the prior slide, there are excess. Those are flowing over to help the A block bonds. And then there is a backup NCA charge of up to 12 mils across all the developed Bridge Park property. So that's all blocks with development subject to a potential backup charge if the previous 6 revenue sources are not sufficient to pay for the A block debt service. And as we know in the final bullet point on this slide, there's 4 revenue sources that for various reasons, COVID related, not COVID related, are not meeting projections at this point in time. That's okay. In most instances, coverage built in, but the fact that those 4 revenue sources are not performing as projected have been the subject of conversations that City Council has had, that some of you have had with the Crawford Hoyne and DePerna folks as well. A block is the most complicated block for this, so that's no surprise there.
Greg, could I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned the up to 12 mils. Should that be needed, and and it is concluded not to be needed at this point in time. Is that 12 mils annually, or is that 12 mils cumulative over the term of the project?
That's up to 12 mils annually, and it wouldn't be a static number because it's a backup charge. It would be annually based on what the calculation agent, that's the DePerna folks and Josiah, as they're projecting out revenue for the next year, looking at potential shortfalls, making sure that bond debt service is going to get paid. They would come to the board with a recommendation of, hey, it looks like there's going to be a shortfall. You might need board to levy, that's 2 mils, let's say, of the 12 mils for a year in order to close that shortfall. So, and then the next year they do the very same analysis, and it might be 0. So you will. So that's an annual.
May I? Sorry, Greg. And this may be more appropriate later in the agenda, but if now is a good time to talk about this shortfall in A block. As you mentioned, Greg, I watched online the City Council meeting, heard your presentation there, nicely done. But I'm curious how we got from that discussion at City Council to Rick's point that those charging those mills will not be necessary now. And I just want to make sure that I understand that.
Yeah.
Do you want to address that now or later?
I was just going to ask you the same question, Rick, as chair, if you wanted to address that now or later.
Why don't we address it with the calculations that Josiah will be reviewing? Is that okay?
That's fine with me, as long as we have a.
Yeah, I'm happy to review it later in the agenda, but that is a great question, and we're happy to report on it here soon.
Okay. All right, Greg, we'll return it to the floor to you.
All right. Thank you. The next block that was in set of bonds that was issued was the D block garage roadway, and I should have put this in the title but didn't. It was also the public market was a big part of these bonds. So a couple of years ago now, there was about $36 million, just under $36 million of bonds to fund the D block garage roadways and the public market. This was a subject of amendment to the development agreement that the city and Crawford Hoying negotiated, went through council. Some of you might have watched or attended a number of the public meetings and hearings back when we were still having public meetings in person. These bonds, while they're large, aren't quite as complicated as the A block bonds. They are secured by the NCA charges and service payments from D block. There was also the NCA sales charge of 0.5% across all of Bridge Park. And I'm sure Josiah is going to touch on this later in the calculation agent report. That is, that helps secure the D block bonds as well and is a source of revenue. There is also the very same backup NCA charge of 12 mils. That's the key to the D block bonds. Currently, these bonds have no projected deficit. And in fact, one of your agenda items today is a refinancing of the D block bonds to create some more savings, create some extra headroom for these bonds to help ensure that there's not going to be a shortfall situation on these bonds. Final note on these bonds is, unlike the A block bonds, there is not as many revenue sources that would be impacted by something like COVID-19. For these bonds, the NCA sales charge is the one that could be impacted. It's not a huge revenue source for these bonds, so the hope is it would not create a shortfall situation. But if it did, just like the A block bonds, the board might have to consider levying a portion of those 12 mils. Again, it's 12 mils in total. It's not 12 mils for these bonds and 12 mils for the A block bonds. So the A block and the D block bonds would have to share these 12 mils. But at this point, we're not looking at a projected deficit. Matt, if you move on, please. And then finally, the most recent set of bonds are for F block. These were issued in September 19 to fund roadway improvements and garage bonds. So at your last meeting, I believe this is something the board acted on for about $2.5 million of bonds. And for your agenda today, there is a new resolution to refinance those $2.5 million of bonds and add another $5 million or so of bonds for additional public market costs, for additional roadway improvement costs, and to provide some money going on the G block for that block directly north of F block. The F block bonds are secured by TIF payments, the NCA hotel charges from the F block hotel. If you recall, the other two hotels are pledged to A block, so they're not available here. But the F block hotel was not pledged, so it is available here. Also, the bed tax grant would apply to this hotel. There is a backup charge on the F block hotel alone. If the hotel charges and the bed tax revenues do not materialize at a sufficient level, along with the TIF payments to pay debt service. There is also the same backup NCA charge of 12 mils, although it works a little differently for F block. It would really only apply if the F block owner doesn't pay the first backup charge. That backup charge I mentioned in the second bullet point there. So it's really just a default situation where that 12 mils across all the development would kick in, not just due to a shortfall in revenues. So with that, happy to take any other questions or yield the floor to Rick.
Questions?
Well, can I just make an assumption that part of the shortfall is due to substantially lowered revenue in the hotel COVID? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and I think Josiah can get into that a little bit more later.
Okay.
But
yeah,
there might well have been a shortfall anyway for 8 block
okay.
Due to the pace of the townhome development. But there's no question that COVID-19 and the related impact on the hotel stays, net center revenue, that exacerbated the situation.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Are there
Good report,
any-
thank you.
Yes, very much. I would agree.
Excuse me, I was on mute and I'm cutting you off, and I apologize for that. I just want to make sure, Greg, and when we get down to Josiah's report, are you going to be available for questions and comment at that point in time as well?
Yep, I'll be around.
All right, thank you. Back to you, Rick. Sorry.
No. Good point. Any questions or comments in from our observers? Okay, hearing none, then we'd like to entertain the developers report. Matt Starr.
Good morning. I'll provide an update on construction and leasing, a little bit on hotels. Allison may jump in here from time to time. Just want to get through this and love to answer questions you might have. Going to construction first and foremost, D block, which is the northernmost block, subject of the bonds that we're going to discuss today. Those buildings, with the exception of the building at the corner of John Shields Parkway and Riverside Drive, we refer to that building as D2 or 6767 Longshore Street. All those buildings are now complete and have occupancy. We expect that final building will have occupancy within the next 2 to 3 weeks. That is the building that will house Haggerty Insurance. They lease almost 40% of that building. So we're pretty excited about the completion of all those buildings. We've been moving people into the units that are in that block. I'll speak to that a little bit on the leasing side. The F Block Hotel, which is also subject to bonds today, will be nearing completion at the end of the year. You see it's moving along pretty quickly on Bridge Park Avenue. We expect that we'll have people start staying in there right after the holidays. The street that's being put in behind that is nearly completed. And then we are getting ready to start moving dirt on what's known as G Block, which is across the street from that hotel. That block will be in planning and zoning very soon for an informal hearing. That block will comprise about 130,000 square feet of office space, parking garage of about 450 spaces, and roughly 100 residential units. Those will be rental units. So that's the construction component of that. Any questions on that?
I do, Matt. On the F Block Hotel, given the circumstance, and I think we're all pretty aware of how the hospitality industry has been impacted by this. But was there any consideration to pausing construction or holding while this time period passed, or how did you go about evaluating that?
There was not any. I mean, Allison might jump in here. There wasn't any consideration to stopping. I think at that point, you're committed. You're probably going to do more damage than good by stopping construction at that point. So we soldiered on, and we know we're going to get through this. And maybe it's a good time to talk about hotel occupancy that we're experiencing on the hotels that are subject to this. But April, we were a little less than 10% occupied in those two hotels that are the subject of the NCA charge. In August, we finished almost 60%. So, we really built back pretty quickly. Now that has fallen back here in September, which is natural. That happens because summer vacations are over. This year, it happened to be some staycations that we were having, but business travel is building back very slowly. I don't think we'll see it start coming back in earnest until probably Q2 next year. When there's a vaccine, I think there'll be a lot of built up demand, but you always plan for that anyway in the ramp up of a new hotel. It's going to slowly build. Fortunately, it's also a Marriott flag, as is the AC hotel. So there's a lot of brand equity that's there, loyalty from some of those members. So I guess to answer your question, we did not consider pausing on it. Allison, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, since, the hotel's still under construction, we plan for ramp up like Matt said. So we have substantial cash reserves and proceeds available from our loan to pay interest. So there was really no benefit to us slowing down. Now, Shaner's engaged and they're making sure to make special plans to try and ramp it as quickly as possible, given the uncertain times. But yeah, like Matt said, we had no concern in continuing that construction.
What is the occupancy in your business plan, that you use to build out the business plans?
Year one, for the new hotels, we typically assume 60% occupancy in the first year, with our stabilized year being year 3. So we'll ramp in between there. And we've been fortunate at Bridge Park to exceed those expectations with our hotels to date, both the Home 2E and AC. But that's kind of standard ramp rate while people are getting used to the new hotel.
Okay. Thank you.
Ace, did
I
you?
was just going to jive in. I this industry. One of the problems is that there are no conferences and no events scheduled, and that's a big part of the hospitality industry. And the problem also is that it's going to take a whole year to get back into cycle or as far as events and conferences. So it's an industry-wide problem. The Hilton downtown dropped all the way down to 5% occupancy for a while. That's a disaster.
Yeah, that's bad.
And like AC said, business travel is really the one that we're waiting on coming back. We had a couple amazing weekends where we were at, 99% occupancy in the hotel. So we've seen the leisure travel come back, but we're still waiting on business to pick up. So yeah, AC, I think that was a good color.
And Matt, can you remind me again, when is construction expected to be completed?
On all the phases? Or on the
All
hotel?
phases of the hotel, or I'm really looking just for the hotel completion.
Hotel will be complete near the end of the year.
End of this year. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on construction?
No, thank you.
Can you comment on the new market?
Yes, the market received a certificate of occupancy on Monday. We have not yet opened the market. We're looking at opening the market sometime in the next 30 days. The merchants are now doing their construction of their individual spaces. There are 19 merchant stalls in the market. We have leased 13 of the 19. We have 3 leases out for signature right now, and we have a pop-up space. So we really only have 2 that are available, and sorting through proposals for those 2. We felt it was important to have a mass of merchants in there, so you didn't walk in and it felt empty. So there are 8 of those merchants that are under various phases of construction right now, and we hope to have 4 or 5 of them completed by mid to late October to be able to open the doors. And I think it'll take the rest of the year, maybe into early January, to have it sort of done. So we're excited about that. We've had to sort of re-recruit the merchants we had, re-recruit some new merchants, but there was plenty of interest. So, we were happy to see that. And you'll be pretty happy to see it when you walk in there.
Matt, have you lost any businesses or leases during this time period?
Only 3 small tenants we've lost, totaling about 1,800 square feet, and we've replaced 1 of them already. So there's been very little fallout.
Good.
The number will be 19?
19 merchants.
Total.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Just touch briefly on leasing. So we now have 521 for rent residential units. We just brought 141 online in the D block. Overall residential is leased 75%, which includes that new 141. Been been a lot of interest in that block. We have a pool in that block, so it's the first pool in the neighborhood. So people have been interested in that. So prior to those new units coming on, we were in the low 90s for occupancy, and our collections have been, as good as they always were. So we haven't had any issues on people paying rent or anything of that sort. On the commercial leasing side, the numbers are very similar. Overall, in the neighborhood, we're leased 75%. If you don't include D Block, which again just finished, we were about 94%. So, we're actively leasing that space, and I would say there is a lot of interest. It may surprise you from restaurants. They've seen what the restaurants here have been able to continue to do. They see how we've been able to execute the outdoor dining components and support those merchants. So a lot of interest from those individuals. We also opened a new sales and leasing office, which I would encourage you to stop in and visit. It's almost a neighborhood concierge. It's really impressive. We're excited for Haggerty Insurance to move in. They'll probably move in late October, early November into that block. This won't surprise you. I mean, office leasing is pretty quiet right now. We certainly have had interest and inquiries from people, but a lot of people aren't even back to the office yet in their existing office. So to think about what a new office might look like is I think everybody's trying to figure out what that quote unquote new normal will be for an office environment going forward. But we feel pretty good about the pieces we have in place, and we anticipate that will come back.
Matt, roughly what % of the leasing space is office versus restaurant versus apartment?
It's a great question. We have about 165,000 feet of what I'd call ground floor space, could be retail or restaurant, and our office space is about at 300. So that math's probably a third to 2/3.
Okay, that's pretty substantial.
Good. Important to note, Lynn, that the residential revenue is about 50% compared to the commercial revenue. So if you take all of the uses into account, office is, still offset by the residential as well.
Oh, if you do it not by square foot, but by rental income.
I think that's an important point too, and it sort of gets lost, I think, sometimes in the discussion of this, is that this is the benefit of these types of developments, is that the residential, not entirely but mostly pays the bills. The commercial is certainly harder. Hopefully this is a once in 100-year situation we're having here, but we're weathering the storm, and I think we'll come out of this stronger. I do believe, and I didn't mention this, but we had our best residential leasing month ever in August. We leased 51 apartments in August. That was better than any month we had pre-COVID. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think I won't list them all, but I know that the impact of the park and the bridge is really starting to have an effect on the neighborhood. In fact, you'll be able to walk across that bridge straight to the intersection here in a couple of weeks. So I think people have seen that. They see the park coming next year. I think we're seeing, people that maybe would have lived downtown or in the central city previously choosing to live here, which is good. So we'll see. I think we'll see continued, interest in residential, and a lot of people, coming to Dublin from other communities as well.
I just would add, we live about a couple miles north of Bridge Park and spend a lot of time down there, even in this circumstance. And it's very energized. I mean, it's there's just a lot of energy and a lot of people on weekends, and even given these limitations, but with the outdoor dining, and the bridge now opening, it really is a lot of energy there. So good for that.
Any other questions?
So are they going to put heaters out there and extend this outdoor dining?
We are
evaluating
it currently.
Yeah.
Yes, we are absolutely evaluating that. we'd like to try to figure out a solution for that and keep supporting those restaurants until things get, try to get back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you,
Matt, I
Matt.
think
Okay.
we were going to talk about G Block, since we'll be talking about that as part of the F Block issuance. Matt, can you just give kind of an overview of where we're at on G Block?
Yeah, G Block, we're going to start moving some dirt there here in the next couple weeks. Try to get the site prepped for vertical construction in the spring. 130,000 square feet of office, about 450 space garage, and 100 for rent units. That would deliver in summer of 22. So we're bullish on office, and people might think that's crazy to start an office building in this environment, but we know, again, we're not delivering it for almost 2 years. So we feel optimistic about that the demand will be there for that. So we're excited to get that going, sort of completes the street, Bridge Park Avenue. And yeah, we're excited to get that moving forward.
What was the square footage of that, square footage of the office space?
130,000.
130,000.
Mm-hmm.
So upon completion of that block, that would leave the 2 blocks of H block remaining, and then a small portion of F block. So if we kind of look out at what we need to do to kind of round out the development here at Bridge Park, we'll have G block going soon. We're going to bring a revised plan for H block back to council, or not council, planning and zoning, hopefully within a couple months. And then we're still working on what that balance of F block wants to be.
That's good.
Okay. Further questions or information to share?
Report.
Yes.
Rick, I think this would be a good time maybe for Josiah to provide his portion of the report.
Okay. Good idea. Josiah?
Hey, hi, everyone. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Great.
Yeah.
So in your packets, we did include, per usual, the NCA budget and all of the detail that goes into the compilation of that budget. Really just focusing on all the revenues associated with all of the bond issues that are currently outstanding, as well as all of the expenses that we have to budget for. The biggest expenses, of course, every year being debt service coming due and all the bonds. We spent a lot of time this year, especially just given the uncertainty of where things are headed due to COVID-19. Its impact it's had on the current 2020 year budget. We spent a lot of time on the revenue side, just analyzing, and of course being conservative, what we think we can rely on through the balance of the year for all of these various bond issues. And then going forward in 2020, of course, applying that same level of conservatism and really assuming 2020, we expect some recovery in 2021, but we don't, we did not assume that we were going to fully recover in 2021 in the projections. Keep in mind, and I'll just make a few more global comments, just keep in mind much of the revenues that these bonds rely on are, service payments or minimum service payments with floor valuations and floor millages, which allow us to really hone in on the bulk of the revenue source and have a high level of confidence in those revenues. There's some revenues that are tied to true performance projections, i.e. the sales tax charge that we levied for the D block bonds last year. The hotel charges, the bed tax charges, the bed tax grant. Obviously those those revenue sources are tied directly to the performance of those assets. And then, the event center revenues as well. There's, percentage of rent there that we actually don't expect to collect next year. We assume only, base rent will be coming from the event center. So I say that just as, kind of table setting for all these numbers. Easy to get lost in all the detail, but we do feel like we have a really good grip on the revenues. One of the things that held us up and some of the discovery that was made kind of late in the process as we were going through on the expense side was the A block bonds and how much proceeds we still had available from that issuance to pay interest on those bonds. So what, and maybe now is a good time to address the A block bonds in which Crawford Hoeing made a presentation to City Council for revenues from the F block issuance that will be a subject of approval for this body later in this meeting. We of that issuance, we had made a recommendation that because there was excess proceeds that was going to be available from the F block issuance, to use those proceeds to pay for what we thought was a projected deficit on the A block bonds in 21 and 22. We still believe there is going to be a deficit in 22. And so we do, unless of course the hotels and the event center recover far more quickly than what we're anticipating, we believe there will be a deficit in 22 and a problem we'll have to address potentially with the 12 mil charge that we've discussed previously in this meeting. But for 21, we when we put projections together, we relied on some information in June, all of which wasn't fully accurate at the time. And one of the things we kind of glossed over with this board, but I want to make sure we spend some time kind of fleshing this out, is the A block bonds. That specific issue was issued as what we call drawdown bonds, which is not a customary way, a very unusual way to issue municipal bonds. Typically, municipal bonds are issued as fully funded obligations at closing. And what we mean by that is, we know if we're going to issue 35 million, all 35 million is typically outstanding on the closing date. So for when you issue bonds for construction projects, you have to pay interest on those bonds at the time of closing, and you estimate what we call an interest reserve. You estimate how much interest you might have to pay during the construction period. In a typical issuance where the bonds are fully funded at closing, you've got the outstanding balance known at closing. The only variable that you have to estimate in this scenario is how long your construction timeline is going to be. It's much easier to be pretty accurate in that scenario versus when we issue draw bonds, which was what we did for A block. There's a big advantage to issuing draw bonds because the outstanding balance of those bonds increases with each draw as construction progresses. And so you actually pay a lot less in interest in that scenario because you're not paying interest on the full balance of those bonds at closing over the construction period. So there's two variables to solve for when estimating your interest reserve in this scenario. It's the same variable as before, how long the construction period is how long will that be? And then secondly, how quickly might you draw on those bonds? When we issued those bonds in 2017, we issued, we made the assumption, we were conservative in our assumption on how much we would need for interest during construction. So I say all that as kind of a preface to, as we were compiling this budget, we went back through all 22 draws that have been made to date for the project and determined that we had more proceeds still available to pay interest than what we thought we had in June. So we actually have close to 400,000 in the interest reserve still remaining, which you'll see as a line item in the report, and we could get to that later. And then further, we have determined that Crawford Hoeing will have a final draw for project costs here coming up to complete the balance of the street and the road work at H Block around the townhomes, and they will actually come in a little under budget. So there will be another approximately 175,000 in proceeds available to also pay interest because they successfully came under budget there. So it was a very pleasant surprise to us that we had these funds still remaining. We're going to take advantage of it. We're going to use the proceeds, the remaining proceeds that were originally authorized to pay interest on the A block bonds on a portion of the interest on December 1 of this year and June 1 of next year, which will allow us, and you'll see in the budget, to balance the budget and not have to issue or not have to levy any of the 12 mil charge across the development. So let me pause there because I know that there's probably questions on that specifically.
I do, Joshua. Thank you for that overview. So these are interest. Is this a reserve, or is this an amount of money that goes automatically into reserve, or is this just an overage that occurs when you're doing the drawdown on the construction bonds? And I'm just kind of curious how.
Yeah. So you estimate we had an estimation at closing of these bonds of how much we would need to draw to pay interest. So of those proceeds that we earmarked for interest, we have roughly 400. It's actually a little more than that, a little more than 400,000 still available to us specifically to pay interest. And then further, because we know how we're closing, we have a closeout draw for project costs coming up here shortly. We know how much then is going to be remaining because they came in under budget. How much is going to be remaining?
Right.
To also pay for interest. So two prong there.
Is all of this, is this anticipated in the development agreement itself? And the corollary to that, are there any restrictions on this reserve as it develops?
So if I can, and then defer to Greg and the city if they want to weigh in as well. So first of all, this is contemplated in the development agreement, and we, with all of the issues, have had what we call capitalized interest, which means we're using some of the bond proceeds to pay those debt service payments in the early years while the project gets up and running. And in fact, this 400,000 or so that Josiah has mentioned is that type of funding. It just wasn't needed as early as expected, given the slower draw that occurred on the A bonds. The restrictions that apply that we've worked through and Bricker has signed off on related to which of the bonds there are actually 3 series being used for the A block, which of those could be applied for this purpose. And we've signed off on the change that was needed and are ready to proceed, if that helps. I did want to distinguish though, when we use the term reserve, because we'll talk about that when we get into the other bond issues as well. I believe all of these issues do have a true reserve, which means that there are bond proceeds that are set aside or revenue that is set aside for the event of a shortfall. And that's a true reserve that's in place. Sometimes it's 5%, some of them are 10%. That's different from here, where we have bond proceeds that have not been used that are dedicated to payments. Both kinds are contemplated in the development agreement.
And these are bond proceeds from Block A, right?
That's right.
So we're not looking at the same situation where we're trying to move proceeds from one block to another block.
That's right.
So I hate to ask the obvious question, but why wasn't this seen 30 days ago?
So, and really, when we last estimated, it was probably 60 to 90 days ago. At the time, we were relying on information from various sources, including the trustee. So we relied on that information as we were compiling the budget. We did the deep dive into all 22 draws to make sure, no one was missing anything and uncovered an information gap at that point in time.
So one of the key assumptions, Josiah, is your revenue assumptions. And what, given this COVID situation, what is the probability of these revenues? You mentioned you believe that they're conservative, but what would be the probability you would assign to the anticipated revenues in these calculations? Is it a 95%,
Yeah.
75%? That's not intended to be a precise question, but what is your feel?
Well, of course we have one major property owner, which, is the Crawford Hoeing development team and all their affiliates. In discussing with them on all of the commercial properties, they do not have any concerns making any of the service payments or minimum payments to which they're obligated on any of their properties. So that's a major revenue source across Bridge Park and the biggest revenue source. And then you look at, some of the individual owners of townhomes, the West Side condos, which were all, closed at pretty high price points. We feel strongly that we've got good credit in all of those homes, in which they'll be making all of their assessed valuation charges that coming due for next year as well. So together, those revenues, the service payments, the assessed valuation charges, and the minimum payments, that is the bulk of the revenues, the majority of the revenue base for all these bond issues. When we get into the margins, actually, when we start talking about the sales tax charges or the hotel lodging tax charge or the bed tax grant or the event center revenues that are more speculative in nature and require projections. Mike Novikov on our team, he was the one to do the bulk of the legwork for this report, and he made the conservative estimations for the hotel bed tax charge, the NCA sales tax charge. So I'm going to let him speak to that now, and then we'll circle back on any follow-up questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so in terms of, like Josiah said, we feel really comfortable with the assessed valuation charges and minimum service payments and service payments. Really, where the projections come in are on the hotels, like the two hotels, the two hotels on, actually, I guess 3 hotels starting next year, and then event center and NCA sales tax charges. So, I mean, the main items are, so there's the bed tax grant that we received in 2021, which we're projected to have $64,000 in the 21 budget. We know right now, as of through August, there's been $42,000 collected by the city So we're projecting about 22,000 more through the end of the year. As you can expect, November and December are usually pretty good months. And as alluded to before, hotels have been starting to ramp up again at Bridge Park. So we're pretty comfortable with the fact that around 64,000 will be granted from the city to the trustee in the beginning of 21. So the big ones really are the NCA hotel charges and then the NCA sales tax charges. And I was really conservative with that. I basically took historicals of the AC Marriott and did 60% of what they brought in month over month, obviously not including April and May of this month, but more of 19. And then for the NCA sales tax charges was about the same. We did about 60% of historical revenues month over month. And then, so I mean, that's what it's kind of ramped up at. And it looks like it's actually getting higher, but I kept it at 60% to remain conservative. Obviously, we have no idea what's going to happen with COVID, through next year. So wanted to keep it conservative to make sure we didn't have a shortfall. Then also for the event center, we packed that down as just the base rent. So the percent of sales wouldn't come into play there. It would just be the base rent. So we feel comfortable with that number as well.
And
Who's
just
paying
to add
that base rent? Who's paying the base rent on the event center?
I believe that's Cameron Mitchell, correct? Yep,
Okay,
Cameron
so
Mitchell.
That's correct.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the other revenue stream in here that, or maybe it's really I guess it's the expense side is the public market, since that's just starting up and all that. And my recollection is that was going to probably not be a profitable business activity, certainly on the early stages. How does that fit into here? Does that eventually become a risk component here?
So, I mean, in terms of, I can speak to next year on this. So if you're looking at the actual budget on page 8, where it's the 2021 budget, so the D block bonds are, as Greg Daniels stated before, there's really no problems with revenue there. So if you're looking at this budget, if you look at line item 3 in income on NCA assessed valuation charges, out of that 2.1 million, 1.3 is coming from D block. Or sorry, on that one, $750,000 coming from D block condos, and then on line item 4 of the 2.7 million, about 1.3 million is coming from that. So essentially, there's already $2 million, and those two they're pledged to D block, and then plus the NCA sales charges. And then if you look at line item 5 on expenses, D block debt service for next year is only going to be 1.6 million. So that's how we're getting to lines 7 and 8 on these expenses, that D block targeted special principal redemptions will be $435 per the schedule, and then there'll be an overflow we're projecting of $97,000 that'll go into the public market O&M reserve account, and that's just next year. And that could possibly be more if the NCA sales tax charges are higher, which I think there's a good chance they will be. Like I said, this is conservative. So in terms of next year, there's no issues with at least funding a portion of the O&M reserve account. But in terms of long term, I think Crawford Hoying is probably better to explain anything like any financial difficulties they may see.
Hey, Rick, I don't want to cut off discussion, but I want to interject quickly to confirm with the city. Do we have this line until 10:30?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Obviously, in my opinion, we've gone through the bulk of the substantive discussion, and the resolutions themselves don't typically take nearly as long, but I wanted to keep everybody's eye on the clock. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, good.
Even with that, Rob, I'm going to ask a question. Even with that admonishment, back to this is referencing Josiah's. I have 2 questions, and then I'll stop. But your opening comment, you were talking about, and we've been discussing how the 2021 budget is a kind of conservative. And I know this is a dynamic process, this growth process, but it's still, 2021 is still pretty substantially higher than 2020 in terms of revenue. And it's in each of the categories if I look back to 2020. So I'm just trying to gauge the how much is new revenue sources that have come into it, or how much expansion, or what's caused that increase in a time when we're being so conservative.
Yeah.
So the main reason there's such an increase is because D Block's coming online. So in the 2020 budget, we didn't have the $1.3 million in minimum service payments from D Block or the $750,000 in NCA charges from the condos. So right there is already $2 million more. And then, so there's a new hotel coming online, the Spring Hill Suite. So that revenue is being accounted for in the NCA hotel charges. The NCA sales tax charges, there's more tenants, there's more vendors now. But mainly it's the D Block revenue and debt service that's increasing the budget.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then lastly, on back on A Block, I think you had earlier reported, perhaps to the city, that the projected deficit on A Block was in the range of 340,000, something like that. And you've got lodging, and this was to Greg's presentation, but because of deficits in lodging charges, rental payments from Event Center, and the H Block Townhomes. And I'm just wondering, could you, I don't know, rank those for me by what was the most impactful of those causes of the deficit?
And just a second. And so just to be clear on the 340,000, that was an accumulated deficit that we were projecting for 21 and 22. So we were trying to solve the problem in 22 as well, and then in 23 we would we projected that we wouldn't have a problem, and if we needed to levy an additional charge, we'd have to do it.
Thank you.
For 21 and 22, we determined that because of the interest reserve being higher than expected, we will not have to levy any charge in 21.
10:30 to tell me. And I am weighing my.
Okay, and then in 22, we thought there'd be a deficit as well, which we're still projecting that there would be. The reason why there's an impact, or I guess from all those revenue sources, to answer your question directly, obviously the AC Marriott is a high performing asset for Crawford Hoeing. When that was pre-COVID, that was generating quite a bit, in just room sales and feeding into that lodging tax charge, both from a bed tax grant perspective and also from the 1% charge that this board has levied on that hotel. The other, I guess the reason why we were we thought in 23 we wouldn't have a deficit is because at that point in time we expect the balance of H Block to be completed and paying assessed valuation charges. That block has had its own challenges, and Crawford Hoeing is going to be moving forward on slightly revised plans, although generally the same concept to finish that block, which will then that revenue from the balance of that block will certainly give us plenty to cover debt service, even if we're still in a COVID-19 pandemic and the hotels aren't doing very well.
Matt, can you speak to that a little bit? The H Block Townhomes?
I can.
Allison, maybe Allison better. Thanks.
We had originally planned 3 nearly identical blocks over there. So if you've driven by their townhome products, there's 22 units on that first phase. They did not sell. That product did not sell as quickly as we had originally anticipated or expected it to. And as we've done with all of Bridge Park, we're constantly checking in with what the market wants. And what we found here is that flat style for sale product is significantly more desired in the Dublin market than townhomes are. So we had to make a change to those plans, and we will be presenting a flat style product to planning and zoning for approval.
Well, as an elder, I get you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Rick, no more questions.
Well, there are actually very good questions, and I think very germane to to our responsibilities as well. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the board or from our outside participants? Okay. Should we then, Rob, with the 15 minutes that we have remaining, should we proceed down through the resolutions here?
Sure, that makes sense to me, Rick. Would you like me to provide kind of an overview, and then we can get into any discussion, any comment, and then take a vote?
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Be good.
Thanks very much. The first, we have 5 resolutions. The first one, 2020-01, this authorizes and consents to the D block refunding, which Greg mentioned and described in the city report. The NCA does not have to sign any agreements in connection with the D block refunding, but with this resolution, we're providing the NCA's consent, and Rick and Lynn likely will be asked to sign a couple of closing certificates, as has been done at the request of lenders on the prior transactions. And so we wanted to make clear that the NCA board was aware of the refinancing, which, as Greg described and Josiah's report outlines, is for savings purposes, and that we are approving. So that's 2020-01, which is the D block specific refunding. Are there any questions?
Could we move the resolution approval one by one?
Yeah, we should take each of the 5 for individual votes.
Move the approval and acceptance of resolution 2001.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, 2020-01?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, I actually, let's hold. I want to confirm we had no comments from the public on that. I did not receive any. Let's take that vote again. We had a motion from Ace and a second from Rick. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, resolution 2020-01 passes unanimously. Resolution 2020-02 is for the other financing that was described. Again, last September, the authority approved bonds being issued by the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority. That was for preliminary expenses on F block, which Greg outlined in the presentation. This resolution is for the bond, the longer term issue for F block. We're retiring those notes and funding some additional costs, including, as Josiah described, some preliminary expenses on G block and some additional costs on D block. Here, there are 2 documents that the authority is being asked to consent to and approve. The first, Greg had mentioned that with both D block and F block, and this is as a result of the development agreement amendment that was approved last year, each block has a supplemental NCA coverage charge on the block. So if revenue from that block runs short, before we go to the 12 mil charge, there's an additional charge on that block, and it basically builds in that there's extra revenue each year to pay debt service on that block. And so the first of the 2 documents is a supplement to our NCA declaration to add that additional charge on the hotel property. The second document, if you remember, we have a dispersing agreement where Huntington Bank collects all the different public revenues that come in from the TIF and from the NCA and from the property owners, and then distributes those to the different bond trusts and indentures. And each time we do one of these deals, we have to amend that dispersing agreement. Last September, we amended the F block. We amended the agreement for F block. And what we're doing here is amending that amendment to clarify that it applies to the bonds and not just the notes that were issued last year. So 2021 approves the transaction and specifically authorizes Rick and Lynn to sign those two documents. Are there any questions from members of the board on 2020-02? Okay. And I see no comments from members of the public that have been received on resolution 2020-02. With that, Rick, I would ask for a motion to approve.
Motion, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved. Approval of 2020-02.
Second motion?
Second.
Lynn? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? Hearing none. Back to you, Rob.
Thank you. Resolution 2020-02 passes 7-0. The next three resolutions are what you see each year. This is our annual meeting. It's a little later than usual. We usually do it at the end of August, but the county auditor is allowing additional time for special purpose districts like the new community authority this year to certify their charges because of the pandemic. We usually describe the next two resolutions together. 2020-03 is the budget resolution. That's where we approve the expenses for the NCA for next year. I would note on that, if you'll remember this time last year, the authority engaged Clark Schaefer Hackett to provide outside accounting services and assist with the state audit. We have spoken with Clark Schaefer Hackett, and they will be available at year end to discuss the year end results and meet with Rick and Lynn and anyone else who's interested to talk through the details. 2020-03 essentially establishes the costs for the authority for next year. And then 2020-04, that charge resolution, that's where the authority determines the charges that are necessary to meet the budget. And here, as described, we have our traditional assessed valuation charge that we've had every year. We have a retail charge, which was levied. It's like a sales tax charge for the D block bonds, and our bed tax charge, which was levied for the A block bonds. And I want to note that the PDF that was sent out earlier this week also called for a debt service coverage charge. Yesterday, we sent out a revised resolution 2020-04, which expressly confirms that there is no need for a debt service coverage charge. That's that up to 12 mil charge that's been discussed, and that the board is waiving the need for that charge. So when it comes time to entertain a motion for 2020-04, I just want to confirm that it's the Word copy that was distributed yesterday, which waives that charge. Are there any questions on either of those resolutions?
On it.
I had one question on 04, and that with the conclusion that was very well explained by Josiah on how reach that, does that, is there, I've heard some, there was some discussion at the council meeting with regard to impact on the waterfall. Is there, with the conclusion that has been reached, is there any impact on that waterfall?
With the conclusion, there's no impact on the waterfall. Is the simple answer.
Okay.
I'm not. I unfortunately did not hear all of the discussion.
Oh, you mean at the council meeting?
We're able to balance the budget for next year, and there's no impact on the waterfall.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions from the board or from the public?
Rick, I have received no comments from the public.
Okay. So we then, shall we approve, can we do these both individually then?
Yes, let's take them one at a time.
03 budget, 2020-03 budget resolution for 2021. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Excellent. All in favor, say aye.
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 And anyone abstain or opposed? Hearing none, then that's unanimously approved. Resolution 2020-04, which is affirms that there is no additional charge necessary. And that do I any further comments from the board or the public?
Rick, I have not received any comments from the public on 2020-04.
Okay. Having none, then move a motion to approve, please.
So moved. Second.
Okay. In a second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And anyone opposed or abstaining? Okay, hearing none. That brings us to resolution 2020-05. Rob, that's the insurance. This is replacement insurance.
That's
one
right.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
distinction. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Well, the one has a copy of that policy been made available to the full board?
No, I believe we've only provided it to you and Lynn. Would you like us to follow up?
You know, it is basically a replacement policy with the addition of coverage for any malicious intent. And I'll leave it to the lawyers
Can we
to
assume,
define
Rob,
exactly
that
what
it's
that
similar
is.
to last year?
I'm sorry, what is that?
Assume it's similar to last year with that addition?
It
Yes.
is the same as last year with that addition, that expanded coverage. The cost is $2,297, and that is after a $550 credit. So that is the net cost. Our budget was $3,000, so we're within the budget for the insurance bond coverage.
Move acceptance of resolution 2020-05.
Second.
Okay. Excellent. All in favor? Aye.
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 Anybody abstain or object? Okay, hearing none. It's unanimously approved. Next item on our agenda is any other business matters. We have had no response from the public. Anything now at this point, Rob?
No, I have not received any comments from the public.
And how about our board? Any discussion items you'd like to bring before the board? Okay. Next, establishing the next meeting, we have the year-end report required to be filed with the auditor's state. What are our next meeting requirements, Rob?
Well, Rick, I think that we'll have a meeting in the late winter, early spring related to the G block financing. And then after that, the next one would likely be the annual meeting next August or September to plan for the 22 charge.
Okay.
I would recommend that we hold off on establishing a next meeting date until we know the timing of the G block financing with a little bit better detail.
Well, and this virtual meeting has worked well, other than myself. So we can entertain the business needs and somewhat flexibly. So, any further comments from the board as far as matters to come before us?
I just want to thank everybody. I know it's been an incredible amount of work and to come to this moment in time, and I very much appreciate it. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I think a round of applause for Rob McCarthy. Rob, as always, you've done a good job, and we thank you.
A lot of work.
Thank you very much, Ace. I really appreciate that.
It's this has been quite a learning experience here. So I think the one observation I heard from a few people is that, you know, we really understand all this complexity just a little bit more than we did before.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. That's been a challenge. Okay, very good then. So would I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, and repeating really do appreciate all the time and effort that's gone from everybody into this meeting, very complex meeting. So,
thank you, Rick. The meeting is adjourned at 10:28.
Thank you, guys.
On time.
Under the wire.
Thanks.
Everybody.
Enjoy Florida.
Thank you.